Thanks for joining me for episode 33 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. This is the 10th episode of season 2, and I'll be joined by Dr. Sheldon Eakins to talk about Tequity, that's equity in technology, and bringing culture, community, and disruptive discourse into the classroom. We'll talk about Skype-A-Scientist, Synth, Flipgrid, Pear Deck, Nearpod, Forms, Solve in Time, and Parlay.
Hi, I'm Dennis Sheeran.
And I'm Raymond Steinmetz from the Instant Relevance Podcast. And we're part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Hello, duct tapers. Welcome in. Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. I'm a little worried about my audio quality today because I'm sitting about 8 feet away from my dog, Kermit, who is sleeping right now. And man, he is snoring quite a bit today. Can you hear Kerm? No, right now, there was no snore at that moment, so we got lucky there. Anyhow, my name is Jake Miller, and as usual, I'm here to talk to you about duct tape and educational technology, but I'm also here to celebrate our connections and have some fun. I'm so glad that you've decided to join me today, and I'm so glad that I have Dr. Sheldon Eakins with me today. I love Sheldon's podcast, Leading Equity, and I'm excited for you to hear his perspective today. I've learned so much from him on his show, and I hope that you will all, and I know that you will all learn a lot from him today here on Educational Duct Tape. Before we get there, though, I want to go over the upcoming Educational Duct Tape schedule for you. We are in the thick of the holiday season here in the U.S., so it's going to mess with our normal schedule a bit. First off, if you go to bit.ly/edu duct tape calendar, you could see the calendar for the show and even add some of those important events like the Twitter chats to your own calendar. So the show normally comes out every other Wednesday, but that would put the next episode arriving on Christmas. And while I'm sure that some of you will consider it to be a present, that's not an ideal day to drop a new episode of a podcast. 1 week from then is New Year's Day, so that doesn't work well either. So here's the plan. This episode comes out on Wednesday, December 11th. Next week, on Wednesday, December 18th, we will have a mini episode, as scheduled, and our final #EDU Duct Tape Twitter chat of 2019, also as scheduled. The following week, on Thursday the 26th, the day after Christmas, I'll fill the Educational Duct Tape void with a mini episode, so it'll come out on a Thursday instead of Wednesday the 25th. It'll come out Thursday the 26th. I'll do the same the next week on Thursday, January 2nd. So again, instead of Wednesday, January 1st, it'll be Thursday, January 2nd. Then on Wednesday, January 8th, we'll resume our normal schedule from now until June. If that's not enough Jake Miller for you, which you're weird if it's not, but if it's not, you can also hear me on an episode of Joshua Stamper's Aspire podcast. It's a leadership development podcast for educators, really phenomenal podcast. I had a great time meeting Joshua at the Teach Better 2019 conference, and the two of us had a great chat there, and you could hear it in a recent episode of his show. I'll put a link in the show notes, but you can also find it in whatever podcatcher you use. By the way, another thing that you should put on your calendar, today's guest, Dr. Sheldon Eakins, is hosting an online Leading Equity Summit from January 2nd to 7th. Lots of great speakers, lots of important topics, all for free. I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can find that. I'm excited about it myself, excited to learn from some of those speakers. There really is a great lineup that he's got for that. I also want to remind you that if you're presenting at or attending any upcoming conferences or events and would like to support the show, I'd love to send you some stickers to pass out. Just go to jakemiller.net/send-me-stickers. There's also details there for getting me to send you stickers just for you. Speaking of stickers, I've got my GIF and GIF stickers back up for sale again at jakemiller.net/shop. I plan to send out shipments each day, so if you order soon, they'll arrive in time for Christmas. My fingers are crossed, by the way, that I'll be unveiling some new educational duct tape swag in January. For now, though, if you're interested in a gift sticker, a GIF sticker, if you're a weirdo, or an educational duct tape button, head over to jakemiller.net/shop. Okay, let's take a quick look at my upcoming calendar, and then I'll hop up on the soapbox. I will be in Castleberry, Texas in January, the OETC Conference and Revere Local Schools in Ohio in February, and I'll be one of the keynotes at KISTI in Kentucky in March. I'll also be doing a full-day workshop about Flipgrid at Kent State University in early February. Details about all of those are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget that after you listen to today's episode, you can head over to eduducttape.com/certificate to claim your certificate of listening, laughing, and learning in hopes of getting some PD credit for your time. And by the way, if you try that out, I'd love to hear, is your school accepting those certificates? Are they giving you credit for those? I think they should. I don't know why they wouldn't, but I'm just curious to hear what the reaction to those certificates has been for any of you that may have tried them out. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. That's perfect. Climb up on there. So my wife, April, and I got married in 2007. I barely made it to the wedding, though. On the morning of the wedding, a few of my groomsmen and I kind of lost track of time. I remember being shocked when one of the groomsmen shouted out that the limo was waiting for us in the driveway. I'm like, oh, what? We have to go? Oh, it's time? So what had distracted us from going to the most important event in my life? Guitar Hero. Well, Guitar Hero and Flo. No, not Flo from the Progressive commercials, though I bet that she can shred on Guitar Hero. Flo, the psychology concept. I first became aware of Flow, the work of psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, in Daniel Pink's book Drive. As Pink puts it, in Flow, people lived so deeply in the moment and felt so utterly in control that their sense of time, place, and even self melted away. And Flow describes exactly what happened on that July morning. We were so deeply engaged in our game that our sense of time melted away. What was it about the game that put us into that state of flow? We always had fun when playing it, but fun alone was not enough to induce the experience of flow. There are 3 principles of motivation identified by Pink that I believe also are the main catalysts of flow. The first is autonomy. Pink shares that an increase in how much we control what we do and how we do it will lead to an increase in our motivation. Not only did I make the choice to play the game, but I had control over which songs I attempted to play. The second principle of motivation is possibly the biggest catalyst of flow, and that is mastery. Pink defines mastery as the desire to get better and better at something that matters. Whenever we have a task that is just right, difficult enough to challenge us, but not too difficult, and we can clearly assess our progress towards our goal, we are engaged in this pursuit of mastery. Most video games are fantastic examples of mastery. On Guitar Hero, you know when you're getting the notes right and when you're getting them wrong. And the challenge is just right. You can reasonably expect to get better each time you play. So, I'm not going to argue that a rock and roll video game has the third principle of motivation, a greater purpose. And Pink doesn't say that all 3 tenets of motivation are necessary in order for motivation to take place. Actually, in regards to purpose, he says, autonomous people working toward mastery perform at very high levels, but those who do so in the service of some greater objective can achieve more. So, while having all 3 is not necessary, it does lead to even higher levels of motivation and performance. While video games don't tend to have much purpose, I bet that you can think of a career that is full of purpose. Yeah, most teachers got into the profession because of purpose. They wanted to positively impact the lives of children or young adults, and this explains why most educators are so motivated. They are motivated to grade papers or plan lessons at home because of their purpose. They are motivated to get to work early to prep their supplies because of their purpose. They are motivated to spend time in their classrooms during the summer because of their purpose. Educators also have varying levels of the 2 other tenets of motivation, autonomy and mastery. In most school systems, educators have autonomy over how they teach, and some, though often kind of sadly low, level of autonomy over what they teach. As for mastery, good educators are always seeking to get better and better. You know, recently I conducted a full-day educational duct tape workshop. You're probably familiar with it because I mentioned it in the calendar at the beginning of the show before. And at that workshop, we had a group of educators, and in the early hours of that workshop, we alternated between me speaking about educational duct tape and the educators thinking about or discussing things that they would like to improve or solve in their settings. Just after the midway point in that workshop, after we finished up our lunch, those educators identified their goal and their proposed technological solution. Then, with my support, they worked to implement it. These goals were different for each person in attendance. One was learning about how they can create videos that can help them flip and differentiate their instruction. 2 others were learning how to use technology for formative assessment in their classroom. But while I watched them work, I noticed that even though their goals were different, they all shared one commonality. They were all in a state of flow. Pink shared a poem from W.H. Auden in Drive, and I think one particular line of that poem stands out here. How beautiful it is, that eye on the object look. I love that term, that eye on the object look. Each educator in the workshop was deeply focused on learning their new skill or carrying out their new task. They all had that eye on the object look. Why? Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. They had the autonomy to select their own goal and their own solution. By identifying something they could improve and giving them time to work on it, they were stretching themselves in the pursuit of mastery. And the cherry on the top of the Motivation Sundae, they all shared the purpose of having an enhanced impact on their students. This led to them all being in the zone, in a state of flow. They were all deeply focused and motivated to achieve the thing they had set forth to do. Within 24 hours, I had received emails from multiple participants telling me about their progress on their plan. It was Saturday. It's almost as if their sense of time had melted away. Where have I heard that before? It's almost as if they were in flow. So what led them to that flow? Having autonomy, seeking mastery, and doing it all for their purpose. Speaking of that workshop, by the way, I shared what 3 of the educators were working on, and I thought that you might enjoy hearing about some of the others. Here are their goals, written in their own words. To better assess students and save me time in grading. To create dynamic and collaborative tech PD. I'm going to add and organize links in Google Classroom for my students to use as extension activities. To create a student-paced process to achieve the personal financial management instruction standards. Each choice would include an instruction component and a variety of Google Suite-based activities. I want to implement Google Classroom for my students. I want to utilize digital choice boards and use certain activities to informally assess my students' growth. To provide students with multiple presentation tools. Creating a list of resources for different verbs. Then try to determine the best way to distribute resources. And when that last one, by the way, mentions verbs, they're talking about what we've talked about on the show before. Focusing on the verbs that we want to achieve for our students, collaboration, creation, formative assessment, things like that, and then identifying the nouns to use for it. So this person was saying that they were going to list out all the possible verbs their teachers might have, and then identify all the nouns, the tech tools that they might select to use. It really is super exciting to look back on this list of things that these teachers identified when given the autonomy and the time to select whatever they felt was important to achieve in their classroom, and given the support and confidence to know that they could pull it off. Autonomy, mastery, purpose.
Today's guest.
Okay, today I am honored to have as my guest Dr. Sheldon Eakins. Sheldon L. Eakins, PhD, is the founder of the Leading Equity Center and host of the Leading Equity podcast. Dr. Eakins has a passion for helping educators accomplish equitable practices in their schools. He facilitates an online course entitled Teaching Through a Culturally Diverse Lens, and it's available on his website, leadingequitycenter.com. You could reach out to Sheldon on Twitter at Sheldon Eakins. That's EAKINS, Sheldon Eakins, and on his website, leadingequitycenter.com, or at his email, sheldon@leadingequitycenter.com. As always, all of that information will be in the show notes, but let's now welcome in Dr. Sheldon Eakins. Sheldon, welcome in.
Hey, Jake, thanks for having me on the show. This is an honor.
So Sheldon and I are both members of the Education Podcast Network, and so as when I joined the network, when Educational Duct Tape started up, I looked through all these podcasts in there, and it's so cool in the podcasting world now in educational technology and in education in general, that there's more podcasts out there than any of us are aware of. So I got into this network and I'm like, oh man, there are dozens of podcasts that I wasn't aware of, and yours is one of them. So you want to tell everybody about Leading Equity?
Yes. So Leading Equity is a weekly show that I publish every Monday. We come out, and it's basically a podcast for educators to ensure equity at their school. So usually I have someone on. It's mainly a guest that I have on, and we talk about certain topics centered around equity. And a lot of times these conversations aren't always happening. Mm-hmm. And so it's great to be able to have this space, a public space in which we can have these conversations, engage in these conversations. And then I like to follow up on Twitter, and engage even more and be able to answer any questions that come up or comments that are made. We talk about the school to prison pipeline. We talk about race. We talk about cultural diversity and bilingualism and asset-based pedagogies and just all of these topics that are centered around ensuring that students get the support, the resources, access that they need, and opportunities that they need in order to be successful not only as students, but beyond school and be able to help with those skills.
Yeah. So I've started listening to the show myself, and I've kind of bounced around, and I'm just hitting the episodes that deal with, in some way, technology first, because that's kind of my lens and I'm looking at everything. But one thing I really like about the show is that it's not always one focus, as you kind of mentioned there. Like, there were some episodes that I've listened to that talked about LGBTQ issues. There are some that talk about students with special needs. There are, as you said, race and cultural and ethnic things and gender things and all kinds of stuff. And like you said, these are these conversations that need to be happening, and they're not in that many places. They're not happening.
Equity is such a broad topic, and that's why I chose the name Leading Equity, because I initially, when I first started, my first thought was, okay, I want to talk about equity. And at the time, I was working in a college access program, and we were helping first generation, first students, first people in their family to go on to college or coming from a limited income background. And so initially, like some of the earlier episodes kind of focused on college access.
Okay.
But as I started really thinking about how broad equity is, right, and as I started getting feedback from the audience, I was like, okay, there's so many other things that need to be addressed, and these conversations aren't happening.
Right.
So I started to branch out because it's still within the equity umbrella. So now you have like social emotional learning, and you have behavior and restorative justice and all type of things that are just underneath that umbrella. And I think it's really important. So I'm just so thankful that I've made it. Can you believe that I've spoken to over 100 people talking about equity? I mean,
that's amazing, man. That's so cool.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was geeking out for you listening to the 100th episode where you were getting interviewed and talking about the journey, and I was like, man, 100 episodes. That's so cool.
Yeah, I never thought I would get. I wasn't planning on it. Yeah. It's one of those. It started off as a hobby. We'll just throw it out there and see what happens. But then I started realizing people were listening to my show.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I need to upgrade some of my equipment. So I went and got me a mixer and got me some lights and cameras. So if I do any videos, I'm like, okay, maybe I need to take this more serious. This is a little bit more than just a hobby. There are people that really need to know this information, that really want this information. So I need to be able to provide quality content for the advocates out there.
Yeah. And that's me. So I appreciate you putting it out there, because this is, I don't know, it's I don't know, a touchy topic to talk about, because I grew up middle class, white, identified as gifted partway through my schooling, never really had any difficulties in school. And so these are things that I need. It's like I need somebody to lead me on this journey through it, because I didn't have to take any of it personally. And I don't feel that my undergrad training did me well in preparing me for the different types of students that I would deal with in schools, and how to equitably treat them and help them learn and grow and benefit, and without trying to homogenize everybody. And so I'm like I said, I'm glad that I have your podcast to listen to, because it's helping me on that journey. And I think a lot of people feel the same way.
And it's funny that you said your undergrad. Your time in undergrad, you feel like you came out and you weren't prepared in the equity side of things. So you probably got a lot of the, theoretical foundations of teaching and learning and all of those kind of things. And those are great. I mean, Don't get me wrong.
Right.
They're awesome. However, often we don't get to choose, like we don't get our choice school. At least a lot of teachers I know, they don't, fresh out of college, they basically get the job that they get.
Mm-hmm.
And often those those jobs are placed into these schools where their lessons, the instructions that they got as a college student aren't reflecting what they're actually seeing in their classrooms.
Yeah,
and so
that's what happened to me.
That piece is often missing. Yeah. And even myself, there was a lot of things that I had to learn when I first started teaching, because it wasn't necessarily brought to me or brought to my, or maybe I didn't pay attention, but it just wasn't on my radar. And kind of like to touch on what you said even before that, as far as your background and where you grew up, it's one of those things where it's like, if I never had to deal with these situations, if I never grew up in a certain area that might have been deemed as low income or in a poverty stricken area, if those things have never been on my radar, if I've never experienced it, then I may not be thinking about it, or I may not notice it. And so when I try to have guests on that can bring up topics that we aren't talking about, to bring a different lens into your perspective as an educator, I think that's so valuable. Because just because we haven't experienced it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right. Well, yeah. And just because we haven't experienced it doesn't mean our students haven't experienced it. Right. And so we need to be prepared for how to handle those situations.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Here we are. I feel like we're actually doing an episode of your show instead of my show right now.
I was trying to be careful. I was like, I don't want to ask him questions like he's one of my guests. It's nice to be on the other side of the mic, but I'm trying to be careful. Like, this is Jake's show. I don't want to take over Jake's show. But
nobody minds Sheldon. They're tired of me anyhow. So they're like, Sheldon, take it over. No, you could see as I'm talking to you about this and asking you questions about it, how much how it sparks thoughts in my head as I'm listening. Like, wow, I never really considered that, right? And and thinking through these things that I've never been forced to consider. So I encourage everybody to go out and check it out. But let's have some fun now, and then we'll get back to some of the education talk. We'll play a little game now. Does it sound okay to you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
2 truths and 1 lie.
We're going to play a game of 2 truths and 1 lie. So you're going to give me 3 statements. 2 of them will be true. 1 of them will be a lie. I will attempt to guess the lie. I normally get it wrong and then butcher actually even playing the game correctly, but we'll see if I can pull it off today. So what are your 3 statements?
Okay. First one is I turned down a baseball scholarship to a local community college in Houston, Texas, to go to a historically black college in Alabama instead. Number 2, I was hit by a car in the 7th grade before one of my football games. And number 3, I'm afraid of bees.
Afraid of bees. That one seems too trivial to make up. Like being afraid of bees. Like I can't picture you sitting there preparing for this and thinking like, what ridiculous thing could I say that's a lie, and making up I'm afraid of bees. So I'm gonna assume that one's true. I'm gonna guess that the baseball scholarship was a lie.
Jake, you don't think I could have made it to the baseball scholarship?
No, I think you accepted the scholarship. I don't know what I think.
Okay. To be fair, I did play baseball. I played varsity baseball in high school. However, I never got offered a scholarship. So that one was the lie.
Oh, if I could have offered you a scholarship, I would have. I apologize, I didn't.
Well, I did, next time when I go back to college, then we'll definitely plan that out.
Well, you're in college right now. You're taking classes right now. Can you play the team?
Right. I am. Yeah. I think I might be too old now that I think about it. So maybe
there's an intramural team for you.
Running those bases might take a toll on my body at this point in my life. Before I've definitely 10 years ago. Oh yeah, I would have been on it, but bases are not my thing anymore.
We need to just we will hit and somebody run for us, right? That's what we want to do. We just want the joy of hitting.
We should have like a EPN Education Podcast Network friendly baseball game or something, right, so we can go out there and do our thing.
I don't know. All of us running around the bases. I'm not sure if it's a great idea. Somebody will get hurt, I think.
Somebody, but that's the fun of it. That's the joy of playing the game. Someone's gonna get hurt.
Let's get hurt.
As long as it's not me,
right?
Then it's all good.
Okay, so the baseball scholarship is a lie, but you were hit by a car in 7th grade on the way to a football game.
Yes.
Oh man.
Yes. Do we have time? Can I share?
Yeah,
the story
go for it.
Okay, so I'm on the football team, 7th grade. Right before the game, we say, hey, let's go to McDonald's. Let's get something to eat. And then we'll catch the bus to head over to the game. So it's just like 5 o'clock. So this is like rush hour traffic in Houston.
Okay.
And there's a 4-lane road. So I see the cars passing, and one of the cars stops and it's like kind of motions me to go across the street. So I said, okay.
Oh no.
So I start running across the street, but it's more there's more lanes.
Right.
So
yeah.
I didn't see a car approaching in the next lane over.
Oh.
And so that car like hits me and I get knocked out into the air and land on my head.
Oh.
And I still have a bump on my head to this day, as a matter of fact. But yeah, I ended up having to go to the ambulance and I missed the game. Luckily, they dedicated the game for me. This is for Sheldon.
Yeah.
And we won. So I guess, that was my spirit lived on the field there for them. So yeah, that was an experience.
Oh my gosh. The lesson here is don't eat McDonald's, I think.
Well, they say look both ways before you cross the street.
I guess we could use that one.
I could have done better. Yeah.
I guess that could be our lesson. That will keep me from losing McDonald's as a sponsor. They've been sponsoring the podcast for a while. I bring in a lot of bucks out of that one.
A dollar menu. Yeah. So I, just for a quick bite to eat, and that was like the second to last game. I think there was maybe one more game after that, but I didn't end up playing that one either. So I missed those last 2 games.
Ooh, that's rough. That's some scary stuff, man.
It was in its prime time for. Listen to me. I'm 5'7".
Okay.
I was 5'7" in the 7th grade, so I was actually one of the taller kids on the team.
Right.
So like when I got to high school, it's a lot different because like everyone started growing past me, and I just kind of stayed at the same. So now I look all short. But man, it would have been really nice to play those games because I was on the top of my game at that time in middle school.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
But then that Honda Civic or whatever it was.
Whatever it was. I don't even remember what car it was. I just know I woke up in the grass with everybody standing around me like, are you okay?
Oh man. That's a story. That's quite a story. So now what is scarier? Running across a 4-lane highway or bees?
Or bees. Well, that's a hard one, man.
For you it is. For me, it's not.
If I'm getting chased by bees across 4 lanes of highway, then that's the worst of all.
Right.
But I would say, 1 bee is fine.
Okay.
I'm okay with 1 bee. So, but when we're talking about swarm of bees, that would probably be it for me.
Yeah. You would take the highway over a swarm of bees?
I would take a 4-lane highway over a swarm of bees.
I think I would too, actually. I would just be a little bit more cautious about the highway than 7th grade Sheldon was. I think we're making the right choice here. We will cautiously move across the highway. Nice.
That's right.
Let's now jump into the actual educational duct tape. So educational duct tape, for anybody that might be new out there listening right now, is my goofy theory, my metaphor, my decision-making protocol that says that educational technology is at its best when we're using it as a tool, like duct tape, to solve a problem in our classroom, to meet a goal in our classroom, to address a learning standard in our classroom, rather than viewing the technology as the focus. So even though we're always talking about the technology on this podcast, we're coming at it from a teacher lens, something that teachers trying to do in the classroom. So when I was, preparing to have you on the show, Sheldon, I wanted to really bring a lot of value to the audience from the stuff that you share through your podcast and through your work and through your online courses and things like that. I don't want to just ask you about like, what's your favorite tool for graphic design? Because you might have a favorite tool and people might, appreciate hearing about it. But I really want to focus on things that are going to bring everybody a lot of value from your perspective. Does that sound good?
Yeah, and it's Canva, by the way. That is my
Canva's the answer. There's a little bonus tidbit in there.
Yeah. The poor man's Photoshop. Yeah, that's my go-to.
There's nothing wrong with some Canva. Canva does good stuff. So the way that I picked questions for this episode actually came out of one of the first episodes of your show that I listened to, which was episode 97. It had Dr. Amy Samuels on, and she and you talked about 4 things to consider in the pursuit of fostering equitable and inclusive classrooms. And I do, by the way, feel like that's one of those episodes from the ones I've heard that kind of is a nice primer to your show for those people out there who haven't listened to it yet, because it's kind of an all-encompassing topic that you guys were talking about there. But I also feel like the 4 things that she shared that you discussed with her could be addressed from a technological lens. So the first one is a question that was one of her points asked as a question, and it was, how can we integrate students' cultures and communities into the instruction? And do it effectively. So I'm really excited to hear your perspective on this. How can we integrate the students' cultures and communities into the instruction?
The first thing is we have to know who our students are in order to be able to integrate their culture into the instruction, right? That's the first step. So I've worked with teachers sometimes, and they'll make these blanket statements like, well, I don't care what color my students are, or all my students, I treat all my students the same. And, or another comment I'll get, or, it doesn't matter but the reality is, Jake, it does matter.
It does matter, yeah.
We should care who our students are, and race does. Race impacts everything that's our society has. I mean, that's just how the United States operates. Race is very, very prevalent within everything. And if we don't pay attention to those things, then we're going to miss opportunities to be able to really highlight and address our students' needs. So how do we integrate a student's culture? First, like I said, we have to understand and know who our kids are. How do we know who they are? Simple questions. We could do a survey beginning of the school year and say, hey, here's a little survey. I want to know who you are. What's your birthday? What language is spoken at home? You could ask them questions like, what are you into? But go beyond, what kind of music or what kind of movies you like, those kind of things, those surface level things, but really dig into culture. And culture isn't just race, right? Culture is in so many different things. So even though, in our school systems where there might be diverse students when it comes to race, however, there's a lot of schools there's so much segregation in our school, which is a whole nother podcast conversation that we could have. But there are a lot of schools that are monocultural. There's one culture as far as, race is concerned. So if we could still take the time to learn about their cultures as well. So the first part is knowing who they are. And that's simple, asking questions and really developing those relationships. Once we are able to do that, then it takes a little time to procure content that is relatable and relevant to your classroom, your classroom demographics. And once we start doing that, I had a conversation with a teacher not too long ago, and her classroom is predominantly students, indigenous students. And we were talking about, okay, you're about to teach another lesson. How about you involve some indigenous cultures or authors or something that's relatable to your students? And the return answer that I got was, well, it's not in my textbook. Gosh. If we don't go beyond our textbook, then our kids of color, especially, are going to miss out a lot because our books are not as relatable as when it comes to culture, or they're often portrayed on one side of the story, if you will. So I want to jump on that point while you're on that, because I was reading, you have, when you sign up for your newsletter, I think everybody should do it. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for it. The ebook that you get, it's called Getting Started with Educational Equity, 10 Steps to Get You on the Right Path Towards Leading Equity. And when I was reading through that, one thing that stood out to me, it was fantastic, first of all, but one thing that stood out to me was the section about promoting a decolonial atmosphere.
So some of the stuff you were talking about there is looking oftentimes the way we talk about different groups outside, like outside of white people in our culture, especially in like history classes, a lot of times they're victims. And so what you're saying here is find ways to bring in the people of the different cultures, whatever cultures you have in your classroom, as maybe the authors and things like that, so that you're seeing their culture in a value in another way than just as the victims of these atrocities that happen. Obviously, we should be talking about these things, but also we need to bring them in that light too, right?
Yeah, if that's the only experience that I get as a student is slavery and conquistadors and genocide, and that's my contribution, or that's the content that I'm going to get in regards to my people and my background, then what kind of message is that? Not only is it given to me, but to the other students out there. Like, that's going to further perpetuate stereotypes. It's going to enhance white supremacy. It's just, it doesn't work. So we have to be able to, yes, we do need to have those conversations, but that can't be the only reason why my culture, my race is brought up, is because of the detrimental experiences that my people have had. Right.
So I'm sorry to take you off track there, but yeah, so we bring in people of those cultures as maybe they're the authors, or maybe they, whatever kinds of ways they fit into the curriculum, find those opportunities to fit that in the curriculum. So you were saying we start off by knowing them, maybe doing some kind of surveys, and then using that information in ways like that, like you were talking about in that classroom. So back in that classroom, that teacher said that using the books from Indigenous people was not part of her curriculum, or in her standards. So what was her reaction? What was the next step? What happened?
So she said it wasn't in her textbook. And so my thought was like, you can't just jump on Google for 5 minutes. Like, just Google Indigenous, like whatever topic, whatever, the content that you're planning to teach. Can you just look that up real quick? I mean, is it going to kill you to do so? I mean, matter of fact, I believe what happened was, after I had that conversation, she was kind of heeing and hawing, kind of pushing back a little bit. I was like, okay, I tell you what, I'll be right back. So I jumped on my computer. I Googled, short stories written by Indigenous authors, or short stories in regards to Indigenous culture. And I pulled up all kind of information, all kind of websites that had short stories that talked about Native American chiefs, and talked about the different authors that are out there. And I just sent her those links. I said, here's a link that shows Indigenous authors. Here's a link that shows Indigenous culture. Here's one that talks just about the chiefs only, or just the tribes only. And please take a look at this information, pick something that you think will be relevant to what you're planning to teach, and tell me how it went. And following up with her after she did that, you could tell it made a difference. So, like, just that 5 minutes worth of research can make such a difference in a child's life, because their teacher cares about their teacher cares about them as a person, not just, okay, here's the content standard 1.1, whatever, state, whatever. But this is me. This is Johnny. This is Mary. This is Sue. This is Peter. My teacher cares about me, and they're actually taking the time to do a little bit of research to bring in some of my background so that I can really be motivated to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So a couple things that kind of jumped out to me when we were talking about it. So I kind of, like we were talking before we started recording about how, I'm coming at things always from a technology mindset, and you're, an equity expert and coming at things from an equity mindset. And so I've got some technology kind of follow-ups on that. So you talked about maybe surveying the kids. So obviously we know that tools like Google Forms, or Microsoft has their own version of Forms as well, is a great way to do some surveys. The nice thing about a survey like that is that allows you to bring in kind of anonymous. I'm saying anonymous, but I don't really mean anonymous. Bring in information so the teacher knows who it's coming from, but the students aren't seeing it. So it gives them that safe zone to just tell the teacher that information, so the teacher could then utilize it. And then there's other tools where we could start to actually display their voice to the other students, whether it's Flipgrid or Synth, or these tools where they could see each other's submissions, or if the teacher wants to, they could have it turned off so they don't see each other's submissions. But it reminded me of a couple episodes ago, I had on Stacy Roshan. Actually, it was more than a couple episodes. It was back in September, I believe it was. And Stacy was talking about how in her classroom, she's a high school math teacher, and she asks kids a lot of questions. She, surveys the kids and things like that. And she talked about how the kids need to see you using that information after you gather it from them. Because if they're feeling like they're answering these questions for you and you're not then acting on their answers in any way, then where's the purpose in doing it? So what you're essentially saying here is ask them these questions and then turn and utilize that information. So then the students see yeah, they really do care about my background, right? And the information that I provided. Exactly.
I mean, what's the point of collecting data if you're not going to use anything,
right?
Do anything with it, right? So yeah, that's exactly right.
We were talking on another previous episode with Mike Mohammed. He was talking about how in his class, he asks the kids questions via Pear Deck. You could also do Nearpod. He happens to be in a Pear Deck school, but if you use Nearpod or Pear Deck, and ask them questions about the learning experience, right? What could he be doing to better benefit the students? And he says it's difficult to hear those answers back when they say well, I didn't really, the way you taught this didn't really make sense to me, but that's the information that he needs to know. And then he acts on it, and they see him acting on that. And that's huge for the kids to see that kind of stuff. But so what that made me think of was if he starts to then maybe ask questions that deal with some kind of cultural, perspectives, or it's all different from classroom to classroom depending on what groups of students you have. But if he asks some questions that lead to better understanding of this stuff and then is able to put it to practice in his classroom, like you're saying, bringing in those books by Indigenous authors or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And then one other thing that jumped out to me, I was thinking about Skype-A-Scientist. So it's a free program that's out there, and teachers say, hey, I would love to have my class Skype, or it could be Google Hangout, with a scientist with this kind of expertise. And then on the other hand, and she's got scientists or doctors or engineers, science, she uses scientists kind of loosely, that have expertise in these different areas. And they'll say, hey, I've got a class that wants to learn about X, Y, or Z. And then she says, oh, well, here's a scientist that knows about that. And then she links them up and they go from there. One of the questions in there, I don't have it in front of me, so I can't remember exactly what it is, asks, is there anything specific about your classroom grouping, that your students that you have, that dictates what kind of person you'd like to connect to? And it says something about culture, race, gender, things like that. So what a great opportunity to go and say, hey, we're learning about this scientific concept. We would love to talk to an expert, a scientist of some sort, and we would love them to be, an Indigenous person or a person of color or a girl or whatever it might be.
Even locally. So even if let's say you have students of color in your class, mm-hmm. reaching out to local businesses or entrepreneurs that are of color of the same race and bringing them to the school and into your classroom and inviting them to speak. Just that alone allows your students to see, wow, there's someone that looks like me and they're successful. Mm-hmm. They have their college degree or they were able to start a business, mm-hmm. or they were able to, and listen to the story that CEO or that leader in whatever capacity that they're in, that's a visitor in your class. Listen to their story and bring that story out so that the students can grasp that and say, you know what? Yeah, I might, this person came from the same neighborhood as me. Yet they were able to make it out of the situations that they had, the challenges, the barriers that were in their way, and they were able to overcome whatever barriers those were. I can do that as well. Mm-hmm. And that's a quick 20, 30-minute session that you could have in your class that could make such a difference. Yeah. And those are the things that kids remember. Oh, I remember when Mr. Such and Such or Mrs. Such and Such came by the classroom and talked about their business and how they started their business and an entrepreneur, all this stuff. I want to be one when I grow up. Those are the things that make so much difference.
Right. That's an interesting thought there. Is that I was thinking of, let's stick to the content and find ways to connect the culture and the backgrounds to that content area. But what you're saying is totally true too. Like what a beneficial 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Who cares if it doesn't relate to your textbook or your standard, right? It's benefiting mm-hmm. your students, and they're going to take a level of pride and motivation to the other content that they deal with in class in a different way because of that experience, right?
If you can't tell already, I'm not the biggest fan of textbooks.
Right, yeah.
So I'm all about, you can still teach the content and still help the students to be prepared for, those standardized tests or whatever, without having to crack open that textbook. So because often those textbooks are one-sided and aren't as culturally diverse as we would love for them to be. So yeah, just taking the time to invite someone in to have a conversation with your kids, that makes such a difference.
Yeah, I agree. A little note to the listeners too. Back in the episode where we had Journée Armand on from Flipgrid, she was talking about how they do guest mode with Flipgrid, and so that would be a great way. Like if you can't get people from the community into the classroom, if scheduling and things like that just doesn't work out, this is a great way to let those people record videos as guests, right? In Flipgrid, and the students see them, ask them questions, link up with them, and then you're bringing in more and more and more people with a diverse array of backgrounds and from the area or not from the area, all kinds of different things like that.
I'm glad you said that because I didn't even think about that, but you're right. I mean, scheduling, locally is nice, but sometimes you're in a place where you just can't find the local support that you need.
Right.
And so being able to connect Google Hangout or Skype, or like you said, pre-record videos and be able to correspond with folks, that again is an opportunity that's out there.
Yeah. And what a great way to recognize, to have students see that you care, right? That you are honoring this and that it is an important contribution to the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Today's super secret code is baseball. Head to eduducttape.com/certificate and use the code baseball. So I'm going to jump. Normally the format is I have you ask the next question, but I've got to ask this question because I want to hear your take on this. And that is, it's one of the other things out of that same exact episode, episode 97 of your show. And the question was, what she was talking about in the show was disruptive discourse. So first off, I think we're kind of already giving an example of it, but can you give us the lowdown on what disruptive discourse is? And then we'll go from there and how we can promote it.
So I look at it from a disrupting what we traditionally know as education and school and the way school is supposed to be and what kids are supposed to learn and the way that they're supposed to enter into a classroom and the way that they're supposed to exit into a classroom and behave within a classroom, being quiet, don't talk, raise your hand. Those things are great and they work for certain groups of people. However, if we're really trying to disrupt discourse, then we need to rethink how traditional, quote unquote, going back to the colonial days of when education was started. Like it wasn't created for people that were non-white males back in the colonial days, but we still have that same education system has continued on throughout, 2019. So if we're wanting to promote some sort of discourse, then we need to be willing to break up what is, deemed as traditional practices. So one of the things I like to look at is Dr. James Banks' work on multicultural education. And he talks about like one way that educators utilize, try to embed or bring in culture into their classroom is through a contributions method. Meaning they kind of sprinkle in or insert a little bit of culture within the lesson. So, for example, if I'm teaching a lesson on Thomas Edison and the light bulb, well, Thomas Edison, he did this and he did that and came up with the light bulb and that's what we use it. And they go through, break down the whole science behind the light bulb and all that. And by the way, did you know that Lewis Hint Howard Latimer, he was a black man that helped Thomas Edison with the creation and the invention of the light bulb. So it's like, well, by the way, as an afterthought or just kind of like, I want to bring in some culture. So I'm just going to sprinkle in just a little tidbit, a little sidebar, a little small little paragraph, a little note. And then I'm going to go back to my teaching from the white perspective. But I'm just going to say a few words, a couple sentences. So
Yeah.
How about we transform the way that we approach education and we bring it from a diverse perspective, a diverse lens, as opposed to teaching from one person, from the dominant culture's perspective and then sprinkling in here and there, or providing a one little lesson that's so let's say we're talking about World War II. And we're talking about the war and fighting. And by the way, did you know that there was this group of African-American pilots called the Red Tails? And they did this and they never lost a mission or any of those things. But that was just one bar, one little piece within this larger story of World War II.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So if we're willing to transform it to where we're bringing it from a diverse, so we're not just hanging on to the dominant side of the story, but we're mixing it in and it's various perspectives, it's various stories weaved in to make one larger story. That's how we need to start looking at promoting a disruptive discourse. The second part is the additive method, which is basically where you have that special lesson or that special unit. So that was where I was talking about, well, we're going to teach you a lesson about the Red Tails, or we're going to teach you a lesson about the Japanese internment camp. So now we're bringing a little bit of race within the main story or structure of the World War II. What I would like to see, and what Dr. James Banks promotes, is transformative. That's where, again, we're bringing in a wider range of stories that are brought in, like mini stories. You ever watch that movie like Traffic? I think it's what it's called. It's like the movie Traffic is like 6-7 stories, and like the people, the characters within the story, somehow they all are connected. And that's how we should look at things. His last approach is the social action approach. So I've learned this information as a student. Oh man, I've gained so much knowledge on this lesson that my teacher has brought to me. What am I going to do about it? How can we create some awareness, or maybe some sort of action that can be taken in order to address maybe some of the atrocities or social injustice that I just learned about from this group's perspective? And that's like the fourth piece of what Dr. James Banks advocates when it comes to multicultural education. I think, again, at the end of the day, we just need to be willing to break up or disrupt or challenge what we have deemed as traditional practices when it comes to education. Because, again, if we go back to the original structure of education, that a lot of it is still being used today, back in the colonial time, that was not made for everyone. It was made for white males in education.
Right. Yeah, I like that a lot. That social action approach, like I just can't imagine how amazing it would be if you could get to that point in a lesson or in a classroom or in a content or in a unit or whatever it might be, that you've been the catalyst of making that happen. I like this term, disruptive discourse. I like that a lot, and I like how it kind of runs parallel to cognitive dissonance, which is that experience of when you have that disruptive discourse and you ask yourself that why question, and you realize that something you've taken as the way we do things maybe doesn't make sense anymore. That's that cognitive dissonance feeling. That's kind of you on the tipping point of starting to change your practices. Yeah. So what are some of as a professional, what are some of your favorite ways to engage in this disruptive discourse? What are some venues, whether they're online or not? What are some places where teachers can do this outside of their own staff room?
I follow the work of Dr. Michael Dominguez. He is an amazing individual, a researcher. He talks about decolonizing the classroom a lot. If I'm trying to look for resources or ways to try to disrupt, I do things on my own. I do my thing when it comes to disruption. Like I like to challenge. Again, I told you earlier in our conversation, I'm not the biggest fan of textbooks. And to me, again, traditionally, we use our textbooks. We teach the class based off of the textbook. And that's a go-to for me. Is like, why even open this thing up? Like, I can pull together a class and the content that's needed, and it's going to be relevant and relatable to my students in my classroom that are going to be sitting in this chair. And it's not going to be this one size fits all approach to curriculum and instruction that was provided through this textbook. It's going to actually be something that's personally handcrafted and catered to my student. Not only is it going to be handcrafted and catered to my students, but I'm going to involve my students in that creation process. So I'm not going to just say, you know what, I think this is what my kids need. Oh, I think my kids are going to like this, so I'm going to teach this part. No, I'm going to ask them, what do you want to know? Like, here's the class. This is the title of the class. What would you like to learn in this class? And how can I make sure that you're going to enjoy it? And involving them in that process and letting them co-teach and those kind of things. Again, these are things that we can do, simple things that we can do that creates the buy-in from our students. And not only does it create buy-in, but again, it lets them see that you care. Like, you genuinely care. You're not just teaching what you're supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to teach or the traditional way, but you genuinely care about the success of your students, and you're putting the effort in to do so.
Yeah. And so that goes back to some of those practices we talked about at the beginning, where this could be a in-class discussion, right? Where you're at the front of the room talking to the whole class, or you're in the middle of the room and the students are sharing and things like that. Some educators might not be comfortable with that format. They might feel a little, I don't know, maybe cornered by all of the students voicing their own opinion right there live. So then maybe they want to do something that's a little more asynchronous, or that the teacher kind of screens the responses and has the time to process them. And so then practices like using Google Forms or something for a survey would be great, or using Pear Deck or Nearpod during like a live lesson and asking the questions right then and bringing in all the information. But like we mentioned earlier, then you've got to actually put that into play in some way, show the students that their perspective is valued, that what they brought up is valued. But you're right. The more power you can give the kids in planning out what they're going to learn, how they're going to learn it, the better things are going to be.
Yeah, definitely. So that's my 2 cents on disruptive discourse.
My apologies for the interruption here, but I realized that in this segment with Sheldon, we really didn't focus on any particular EdTech tools, which I think is fine, but I do want to share some EdTech tools because I have some that I want to share with you. So if your goal is to get discourse or discussion in your classroom, whether it's disruptive discourse like we're talking about or not, if you really just want a way to use educational technology to manage that in your classroom, there are some options out there. First, a couple of the common ones that we talk about regularly on this show, kind of the darlings of educational duct tape, like Flipgrid and Synth. As you know, with Flipgrid, students could post a video response and then respond to each other's video responses with video responses of their own. Synth is pretty similar, using audio, and would allow students to record their reflections, their responses, and then maybe even respond to each other. The nice thing about both of these tools, as with the other ones I'm going to name, is that it creates a record of what was said here. Number one, that allows the teacher to assess the student's abilities to have this discourse and to discuss, and maybe their understanding of whatever kind of content that they're discussing. It also allows the student to measure their growth over time through these discussions, but maybe most importantly, as we talk about things like disruptive discourse, it creates a record of what was said if there happens to be any controversial topics being discussed. So some other tools, all of which will kind of have those same capabilities for you. You've got VoiceThread, which is also an audio-based discussion tool. You've got 2 different kind of chat room settings, which are backchannelchat.com and YoTeach, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. Next up, you could just use the commenting features in Google Classroom. You could also use Padlet, where students could post their comments or whatever it might be, and then they can respond to each other's. Nice thing about Padlet is you could use text or audio or video or images or a combination thereof. So that is a nice feature for having these discussions there. Next up, if you are in a Schoology school or school district, Schoology's discussion board format is fantastic. It makes it really easy to assess it and have students respond to each other. One thing that I like is you could set it so that the student can't see each other's comments and posts until they posted their own. So they have to make their own post before they see each other's and can then start responding to them, which I think is really nice. And then one kind of new tech tool on the EdTech scene that I want to focus on here too is Parlay. If you haven't heard of Parlay, Parlay has 2 different features. One is an online discussion board tool, and then the second is kind of an online format for managing an in-person, face-to-face discussion. So if you're doing like a Socratic seminar in class, Parlay can act as the system to manage who gets to talk next, and the students can take notes in there, and the teachers can kind of reflect on who has talked how many times in case they're, assessing the students in any way based on that kind of stuff. But then it also has that online version where students can be anonymous, but the teacher can see who each student is. Students can, just like in Schoology, be set that they can't reply to each other until they've made their own posts. Teachers can go in there and do kind of assessments of their comments and things like that. And it also has a lot of really nice like data features built into it as well. And you can check out Parlay at parlayideas.com. And then the links to all of these other tools will be in the show notes in case you're looking for a specific tool to help you manage having these types of discussions in your classroom. Now let's get back to the end of my chat with Dr. Sheldon Eakins. Yeah. So in terms of, I like to go out there on Twitter and learn from other educators out there. And I know you're on Twitter as well. So you mentioned Dr. James Banks and his work earlier, and Dr. Michael Dominguez. Who else are some people that we should be listening to out there inside of the tech world and outside of the tech world? I hate to put you on the spot because you're going to name if you name 4 people, there's going to be 200 that you forgot, right? So I hate to put you there, but who are some people we should rush out and follow to help us start to think about some of these things?
Well, if we're looking at technology and tequity, if you will, my first person is definitely Dr. Sarah Thomas. Sarah, good friend of mine. She's a great person to follow on Twitter. There's also D. Lanier. He's also an amazing person to follow. And I'm sorry, I don't know their Twitter handles.
No, I'll put them all in the show notes. That's fine. Sarah's. I know. I can't forget Sarah's. It's Sarah the teacher.
Yeah, it's Sarah the teacher. And then Dr. Will, Dr. Carrie Coca is also another person as well that are like my go-to technology STEM people that are amazing folks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I'll put all those in the show notes for the people that want to follow those people. One tool that we should spotlight. Have you tried? I know D is involved in a project because I've looked at it online before. What is the name of the project that D is doing? The design thinking thing he's got going. Solve in time. Yeah, and his hashtag. Yeah. Solve IT. Yeah, that's something people should try.
I just interviewed him not too long ago, and we were talking about it for my show.
And I think this actually fits kind of well with what we were just talking about, which is that disruptive discourse, because it's all design thinking things, and there are some questions that are questions we don't normally think about in our classroom, right? And the students go through a design thinking process to try to solve them. And I do think that involves some kind of modeling of disruptive discourse for the students to see that kind of stuff happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited to listen to that episode with D to hear more about it.
Yeah, definitely. So those are the folks off of the top of my list. Top of my head, Sarah Thomas, Dr. Will, D. Lanier, Carrie Coca. And then Ken Shelton also is a good person to speak to about technology and equity. Yeah,
and what I like about getting some of these names in there is they're not just sharing about just technology, just ed tech tips like I tend to do out there on Twitter. It's with a certain lens, and that's what we need to be doing as educators, is hearing from all of these different ways of looking at the practices that we take in the classroom. Hearing from people who talk about technology in relation to equity, who talk about classroom management, maybe, who talk about like design thinking, like we talked about. Hearing all of these different things that give us a different way to think about the frameworks we're using in our classroom, why we're doing the things we're doing,
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, Sheldon, I'm going to let you go. I hope there are no bees in the area or anything like that could pester you. I hope that you remain be safe and look both ways when you cross the street. But we really appreciate you being on the show. I love the work you're doing. I'm going to put into the show notes links to your newsletter, to your podcast, to your online course about teaching through that culturally diverse lens that we were talking about earlier. I really hope everybody's going to check out the work you're doing out there. I really appreciate you being on the show today, man.
Hey, I appreciate you allowing me to almost overtake your show for a few minutes. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was great, man. I am so glad that I had an opportunity to get Sheldon on the show. I started listening to his show a while back when I realized that I needed to work myself on focusing more intently on making sure that I was supporting things being equitable in the world of educational technology rather than just kind of ignoring it and assuming that other people will handle that stuff. I need to be part of the solution. So that's why I listen to his show. I hope you will go and do the same. Now it is time to hear from some duct tapers. Before I jump into any of the duct taper content, I do want to point out that now through December 31st, 2019, at 11:59 p.m. your area, so before the ball drops in your neck of the woods, I'm doing a little giveaway. If you tweet or post on Instagram along with the hashtags EDUDuctTape and MyFave. So if you, again, share your favorite memory or takeaway or learning experience or laugh from the very first calendar year of the Educational Duct Tape podcast. That's right, it launched on January 2nd, 2019, so we're about to hit the 1 year mark since this podcast first came out. So I'm doing a little contest. If you share your favorite or funniest moment from the podcast from during this first year before December 31st or before the end of the day on December 31st, you will be entered to win a free registration in an upcoming cohort of my GIF a Day learning opportunities, which I do expect to launch the third cohort of level 1 in January and the first cohort of level 2 probably in February. Now, you'll hear about both of those if you subscribe to my newsletter. So if you don't, you're going to want to go and subscribe to my newsletter, which is at jakemiller.net/newsletter. Now, it is time to hear from some duct tapers. So first up, let's hear from a duct taper over on the Educational Duct Tape Flipgrid.
First, I want to say I love your show. It's a great resource. I love all the ideas that you shared with us. My name is Felipe Rimmer. I'm a Spanish teacher at Junior Valley High School. You guys were talking about CISO today. This is my second year using it. It just has really changed the perspective in my classroom. Finally, parents can see what high school students do in my classroom. And I can moderate all the comments, and I always get compliments. So CISO, it's not for elementary, it's for the high school level. All right? Thank you for your do, and a great day.
Thank you for that, Felipe. I love hearing about high school educators using Seesaw in the classroom. I think it's so powerful at the higher levels, too, and it gets pigeonholed as just an elementary school tool, which is fantastic for elementary, but as Felipe points out, it's great for high school, too. Imagine, these parents getting to see what's actually happening in these high school classrooms, because we know those teenagers ain't telling them what's going on, so thank you for that feedback, Felipe. Next, let's hop over to the Apple Podcast reviews, and I have a review from Jacques Pearl. I assume it's pronounced Jacques, and the review was titled Love This, and it says, Educational Duct Tape is one of my new favorite podcasts. I really love the one I just heard about ebooks. I often listen as I walk around my neighborhood, and I think the neighbors thought I was crazy when I kept stopping my walk to type my ideas in my phone as I heard them. I will definitely be putting some of these ideas to use in my 7th grade ELA class next school year. So this was back in the spring, so hopefully those ideas are currently being put to use in Jacques' class. So thank you for that submission, Jacques. And for those of you intrigued by the comment about ebooks in that review, that was episode 8 or 9 or somewhere around there with Angela Wotecki. So if you go back in the list of shows and look for the one with Angela Wotecki, she shared a whole boatload of different awesome ebook ideas and tools. Next up, let's check out some of my favorite hashtag EDUDuctTape tweets from the past fortnight, the past 2 weeks since the last episode came out. First up, we've got at Craig Clement, who said, my favorite laugh moment from hashtag EDUDuctTape is probably when at JakeMillerTech called at JMattMiller out on the number of countries, and then Jake calling himself Sheldon at the end of the episode. Hashtag my fave. So this is Craig's entry to potentially win a free registration in an upcoming cohort of GIF a Day, and he's right, that was a classic. So if you haven't heard that episode with Matt Miller from last year where I corrected Matt on how many countries there are in the world, you have to go back and check that one out. And then I didn't call myself Sheldon Eakins at the end. I called myself Sheldon Cooper at the end for calling him out on that. Okay, the next tweet came from during the hashtag EDUDuctTape chat last week and came from at Angela Green 12. And she said, just learning about Sethi's video collection was a huge win. Also, his speaking voice on the episode was akin to soothing, harmonious music as I drove to Cincinnati in the early morning. I could listen to him all day. Thanks for a great episode, Sethi. And she actually included a GIF there to show Sethi how excited she was about his voice. I'm guessing Sethi blushed when he saw that one, although I do agree, Sethi, you do have a very soothing voice. I don't know if I'd call it harmonious, but it was soothing. Up next, and I apologize if I mispronounce this one, came from @Auen, AUEN_ed_tech, and it said, the piece from last week's episode that was a duh moment for me was that I'm sending out tech tips via tech to people who find technology difficult. Big eye-opener. And I totally agree, and a lot of people shared this same thing during last week's chat, that when Sethi and I discussed how, why is it that we're sending out tech tips via technology to people who don't like technology, everybody was like mind blown by that simple revelation that we had there, and a great discussion went on about it during the chat last week. Next up, @Dara, D-A-R-A, Capel, said, trying to put tech tips for teachers in staff bathrooms. I call it tinkling with tech. This was actually a tweet from last week during the chat when I was asking people what something they were working on was, and this was hers, but I wanted to share it because of her tinkling with tech name in there. It just cracks me up how many educators are doing some version of Potty PD, and we all have different punny alliteration names for them relating to toilet humor. You've got Learning in the Loo, you've got Potty PD, you've got Tinkling with Tech. I've decided they all should be issue number 2 when you hang them up, volume number 2 when you hang them up in the bathroom. I'm probably missing some. There are just so many different Potty PD. Teachers are goofy. I don't know what's up with us. Up next, speaking of goofy teachers, let's check out another submission to the Educational Duct Tape Flipgrid grid.
Hi, Jake. This is Jen Lieben. I am a creative technology middle school teacher from Elmhurst, Illinois, and I just finished listening to your podcast with Tony Vincent, and he had talked about using table tents in the middle of his tables to help communicate his classroom rules. And I was thinking that this could be a great idea for middle school teachers, particularly in the elective areas like I am, where we have new students every so many weeks. It's like a revolving door. But table tents, or even like those signs on a stand like from IKEA, using those to communicate maybe like daily entry procedures, like come in and sit, take out your book or your Chromebook, put your other stuff over here, get started on like the bell ringer activity, that sort of thing. Those like daily protocols would be a great idea, and I definitely want to try that out. So thanks for the tip.
Thank you so much for that response, Jen. If you guys don't know Jen, you should go follow her on Twitter and check out her work with Reset EDU. But the episode she's referring to back early on in the season, this was an old response from Jen to an old episode with Tony Vincent, which was, I believe, the second or third of this season. And he talked about this table tents idea. So if you're interested in that, jump back to, I think it was like episode 26 or so, somewhere in that range. Speaking of these Flipgrid responses, though, I love seeing the stuff that's happening in there. And if you have never gone in there and put in a question or a comment or a reflection or some feedback or something like that, or a share of your own, or responded to other people, please go and do that. Head over to flipgrid.com/edu duct tape, or go to eduducttape.com and click on the Flipgrid button. A quick story to share out of there. I just today noticed a string of discussions there between two listeners, Alexa Snyder and Angela Green, setting up a mystery Skype between Angela's students in Ohio and Alexis's in Hanoi, Vietnam. Isn't that cool? That all happened on the Flipgrid for my podcast. That just geeks me out. Okay. Finally, before we wrap up for the day, let's hear who our new #EDU Duct Tape tweeters of the fortnight are: at Barton_IT, at Beck Stein, at Champion Chat FM, at Edu Adiyogi, at Ellen GUZ01, at Kisty Tech, at Miss Use M, at Mrs. Lumbreras, at SDC Thailand, at Sing A Yogi, at Slides Mania SM, at Steph V Chambers, at Tara Martin EDU, and finally at TechSavvy_Teach. And that does it for episode 33 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. I hope you do all of the things I always ask you to do at the end of every episode, but most importantly, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope you have happy, joyous holidays with your families, and I will see you all soon.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please visit eduducttape.com to join the discussion, share possible topics, inquire about being a guest, or contact Jake. And remember, duct is spelled with a T, not a quack quack K.
So Sheldon and I are both members of the. Why am I forgetting the name of our group? It is the
EPN. The EPN network.
The EPN. I'm gonna have to edit that out, 'cause otherwise Nessie's gonna hear it and be like, "Dude, what the heck?"
Yes, he will.
I always get mixed up. Is it education or educational? I'm gonna redo that so I don't look like a fool. Like I'm like them. I put a bumper at the beginning of every show.
Know, right? You should know this.
So Sheldon, yeah, right, exactly.